You got it. All right. So welcome everybody. Got a good class full today. Good to see everyone. I just have a few little announcements. So tomorrow, Wednesday, which is October 18th, 6 to 8 p.m., it's the third session of a Larimer County Water Education Series that the Water Center has been co-hosting with them. This one is focused on watershed health and in-stream flows. It's going to be held at the Loveland location for Larimer County. There's information on our website if you're interested in that. There will be a fourth session, and I don't think I've announced this before, so I apologize. I should have announced at the very beginning when we started holding them in August, but all of the sessions are recorded and available online as well if you want to go back and view any of that. It's just another great resource for water-related information, specifically for Larimer County. In terms of the Your Water, Your Life contest, I am going to hear from the organizer, hopefully some point this evening. She's going to have the midpoint check-in like form set up. So we'll see what that looks like. And I'll let you all know who are doing the contest. We'll set up some times to do that check-in and see how long it's going to be. I would imagine 15 to 20 minutes is all we're going to need. So more info on that coming soon. And then we have an event coming up. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. Yes. And a colleague in Weld County is helping to put on this Colorado Women Weekend. And it is, I think, November 17th and 18th, and it's pretty inexpensive registration. And registration closes, I think, November 1st. So these are upfront.
And I'll just repeat that for the folks online. There is an event coming up in Greeley. It's Colorado Women in Ag. It's November 17th and 18th. And I think you have to register by November 1st, you said. Go to coloradowomeninag.weld.gov. And I'll put that in the chat when I get back to this other computer for those who are interested. Okay. Any other questions, announcements that we should know of? All right, with that, I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, Joel Schneekloth. He is the Water Resources Extension Specialist at the Colorado Water Center. He's based out in Akron. He's responsible for the development of research and demonstration projects relating to water quantity and quality issues that are attributable to agriculture and urban water use, and helps to develop educational programming to help magnify these water issues to the public. Joel specializes in drought education and mitigation, irrigation management, and alternative cropping systems. He also collaborates with Nebraska and Kansas on regional water issues. Very happy to have him here, come all the way over here for this talk. And I think a couple lectures ago, we had some discussion, maybe when Jennifer Gimble was talking about this efficiency paradox in agriculture. And if you did some of the readings, hopefully you'll know what I'm talking about, but Joel's going to focus in on that and some of these conflicts and issues we get into when we talk about trying to save water in agriculture. So thanks a lot, Joel. Go ahead.
So yeah, I'm going to feel kind of weird being stuck at a desk talking. I'm a walker, a talker, and an arm flapper when I do my speak talks to presentation. So, a lot of things is efficiency in agriculture going to save any water? I mean, that's one of the big questions that have been out there for eons. And I don't know what's the percentage here that believe that we can do that. Does it save water? Everybody's going, no. It depends upon the system a lot of times. See, hopefully this goes. But let's talk about agriculture as a whole in the basin. And in Northeast Colorado, in the whole state, 5 of the top 10 counties are based in the South Platte Basin. And the South Platte Basin is a small percentage of the state of Colorado. Agriculture right now uses about 86% of the water within the basin. One of the things I always love to tell people, though, we may use 86%, agriculture uses 86%, you consume 100% as a citizen of Colorado. Because what agriculture grows goes to feed Colorado, the nation, and there are agricultural exports worldwide as well. So 5 of the top 10 counties, 3.5 billion of direct sales for those five counties. There's about 850,000 irrigated acres. Depending upon the year within Colorado, there's 2.4 to 2.8 million. That's all based upon water availability and slowly going down, both to urban encroachment on agriculture as well as declining water supplies. And the big problem is the Front Range has about 80%. Eastern side of the state has 80% of the population and only 20% of the water in the state of Colorado. So there's a lot of controversy and predicaments that we do. So South Platte has always been net water short, depending upon what year you look at. Some years we aren't, most years we are. But the big question has always been, can efficiency increase or help solve the problem? And here's a little bit of a map to talk about the value of agriculture, because it is one of the major economic players within the state. Here's a list of all the top 10 in the light blue here. You can see are all the top 10 counties within the state. Do you notice one thing in particular about that map? They're all east of the divide. So we have 20% of the water, they have 80% of the water, but we have the better agricultural ground within the state to deal with it. And also we can grow stuff dry land as well. So if you're on the west slope, if it isn't irrigated, it isn't producing anything. So a little bit looking at comparisons of agriculture here, agriculture, direct and indirect, $47 billion, about 195,000 jobs within the state of Colorado are attributed to agriculture. The number two, or the number one economic impact in the state is tourism. And depending upon how you look at it, with direct and indirect, they say $60 billion and 370,000 jobs. Ad induced and investment was what they had in this paper. It runs up to 99 billion, almost $100 billion, and over 600,000 jobs. So, tourism is the big one in the state, but agriculture stacks up right there. And most states, agriculture is one of the top industries within their states. South Platte River, prior development, and this is always one thing that we talked about growing up. If you ever read the letters of the pioneers running across as they came across, going from Omaha across the Platte into California, Colorado, or wherever they were going to, Oregon Trail, they always described the South Platte or the Platte River system as springtime, raging floods. By the time summer hit, you could walk across it and barely get your ankle wet. That's the paradox of when you have mountain fed streams of high water availability early in the spring, but when you really need the water, it's dry. So development of irrigation began as mining within the state of Colorado. Then agriculture followed suit. And as some people said, who made the most money during the first years of water development? It wasn't the miners, it was the agriculture people, because they were selling to the miners at exorbitant costs because they were doing all the work up there. So, as the development happened, the river began flowing more consistently through the year. So people developed from, up here. One of the first major developments was Greeley, Union Colony. Then it moved south, it moved north, or east, and then west over the time. And slowly but surely, the river developed as what it is we see now. If you went back to the 1850s, the river would not look like it is today. Would you imagine trees across the river back in 1850? Come on, I'm asking a question. Would you imagine seeing trees along the river system?
Maybe some.
Some, but not very many. Trees were well noted in pioneers' record keeping as highlights of going across the trail. Increased storage in the alluvial. The alluvial system we sit on is an incredible resource in the South Platte system. And that's where a lot of the inefficiencies are being fed into and help with the system down the road. The rivers are a drainage to the aquifer system. Always have been. Whether you're in the South Platte, the Ogallala, all rivers drain. Otherwise, you'd be sitting on a river or a lake bed right now. So, oops, was it? There we go. This is the primary problem with snowpack irrigation is the timing. I mean, the development and the growth of our snowpack starts late September, early October, goes through till you see where it peaks around first part of May, late April. And then the runoff season starts. And when does it end? By early July, when it pretty much just basically peters out, where there's not much water coming out. So the predominant runoff season is by mid-May to early part of June. And that's when, if we were trying to irrigate long season crops or food production systems, we have a very short window. So that's why the development of storage rights, reservoirs within the mountains, reservoirs on the plains, were all developed along with ditches that fed those, that took the water from the river system. That all fed the alluvial aquifer system. So here's a little bit of talk of storage within the South Platte. Look at it, 2.3, almost 2.4 million acre feet of water storage within the state of Colorado in the South Platte Basin. That's a pretty substantial number when you consider how much water is produced on an average annual basis within the South Platte from snowpack. Storage not only captures the water, but it's drought proofing technology. The storage for the dry years, that where we don't get a lot of runoff. I mean, 2002, 2012, years when we did not see substantial runoff out of the South Platte or out of the mountains, the reservoirs were what fed the system with what they had developed and what they had stored. So here's a little diagram talking about, what we're talking about, return flows. Here's, gotta get over, which way you gotta go? Get over here. Okay, which way you're going here? Oh, gotta go the other way.
There it is.
There we go. Okay, here's water's coming from the river. Here's is in a ditch system. Now, not all farmers pump out of the ditch, but most divert right out of the ditch. But we have the ditch system, and what's really in reality here, this should be showing this is leaking as well, because most ditches leak, most laterals leak substantially. But as we irrigate our crops, and this shows sprinkler, it could be furrow irrigated. One of the inefficiencies with irrigation is deep percolation. And sometimes it's not an inefficiency, it's a necessity. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But it goes into the water table that's below, which is now stored in there, and it's trying to get back to the river system. And it's always looking at it in time, place, and amount. So it's not going right back into the river system where this guy can use it. It's downstream that the next irrigator, somewhere down the line, the next irrigator can utilize that and diverts it. So this is a very unique system in the South Platte and how we utilize it. It's a well-designed system. The average number of times that we divert and use and then redivert and use the water, can anybody guess what the estimate is? How many times we divert water across between the start of the state, high mountains to the state line? 7 times is what the estimate is. So it's not a one-time use. So here's the 2 different major systems. One is furrow irrigation. The other one is center pivot. Why would people use furrow when they can use the center pivot, or vice versa? There's definitely things to look at with that, both systems. Predominant irrigation used to be furrow. That was the cheap. We didn't have power systems. We didn't have pumps. So they furrow irrigated off the ditches. So for water conservation and irrigation efficiency, what's the actual consumptive use in a water short environment? And how does efficiency impact stream flows? Because we have developed our water rights based upon the stream flows and the timing of when we have water within the stream. And anything in there that changes that can throw a complete monkey wrench in how water is delivered and who gets water because of water rights. We'll talk a little more. So how the river works. Now, I am not a graphics designer. I am not an artist, as I've told Karen before, right? So this is a very simplistic way of looking at how the river works. So here at the start of the system, we have 20 CFS, that's cubic feet per second, that's in the system. Farmer A or ditch A diverts 5 CFS. Now we have 15 CFS left in the system. Here, next person diverts off 5, now we're down to 10. The next person develops 5, diverts 5, now we have 5 left. And say this end of the system is the state line. And we have a compact to meet during the growing season. What is it, April? Yeah, April 15th to October 1. Sorry, somewhere in there. So we have that obligation to the state of Nebraska during the summer. Now, this is looking at saying there's no such thing as return flows. Well, in this world, everything's happy, go lucky. Everybody's happy in the system. But say we go down here, water short. Now we have 10 CFS later in the summer. This guy diverts 5 CFS. We have 5 CFS left in the river. He diverts 5. Then now there's 0 in the river. Well, this guy has nothing. And the state line gets nothing for the compact. Now, if this guy was the senior water rights holder compared to the people above him, what's going to happen? Anybody got an idea? He's going to call him out. That's the call on the river. So he's going to go, who's the most junior right? Is it this guy diverting, or is it this guy diverting? Or is it somebody way up here diverting? He's going to call them out, and he's going to keep calling out people until he gets his water right. And the state will also do that, state of Nebraska, because they need their water and within the system. So it becomes a complicated issue of who you call out, how you call them out to stop diverting from the river. Now other guys can start using surface rights or storage rights to bypass it, the calls, but those become complicated issues and how to manage the river. During systems, I can't remember what year it was. There was a call on the river for pretty close to 600 days one time, 600 consecutive days. This year, they didn't have a call on the river till I think it was late July. That's not because we had water. So that's the way it works. Now let's look at this system, say 10 CFS, and we're talking inefficient systems. So it's furrow irrigation systems. So this guy diverts off 5 CFS. He's less than 50% efficient. So 3 CFS is now being returned to that system in return flows. So now we have, instead of 5 CFS, we're at 8 CFS. He diverts 5, another 3 CFS comes off his system. We're down to 6. He diverts 5, 3 comes back. Well, look at that. We're down back still at 4 CFS. No calls on the river, possibly, unless this is make a call, but that's a minor glitch in the system at this point. So this is how return flows work in an inefficient system. Now, if we start going to high efficiency system, well, we're diverting only 60% of what we diverted before. How does that impact it? Well, 10 CFS, divert 3, 7 CFS, we're being very efficient, but we're not having return flows now. 7 down to 4. Oops, state line's down to 1. Does that meet the state compact, or is that a diverter somewhere down the line? And he says, I'm not getting my water. I'm calling you out. So that's the management of the system and how efficiency, a very simplistic way of looking at how efficiency can impact the river system. So we go back to this whole thing with low efficiencies versus high efficiencies. Early in the season, well, it looks, you go like, well, it's not saving much. It's not costing us much water, but in reality it is, because with the return flows coming in and no return flows with high efficiency, we're actually cutting the flow later down the river with high efficiency versus low efficiency. And the return flows that we have are now consuming compared to what we are putting back into the river over time. And these return flows are built for years, not just 1 year or 2 years or days, depending upon where you're at within the river system and how far away from the river you are with those diversions. So very simplistic, again, looking at this, native range, even the native range has some deep percolation depending upon the time of year. Not much. It's not always consistent. Looking here under the pasture, that a lot of the basin is looking at, outside the main river system, but it's the irrigated systems that we're looking at, and that develops water back to the water table, creates that bulge. So here's a quick look at how we look at good irrigation systems, or poor or good. When I keep looking at my screen thinking, where's the mouse? And I got to look up here. With a poor irrigation system, all this yellow here is deep percolation. This is over here is a dry area, so it's not seen. And you would also see runoff coming off that field. Well, those aren't wastes. And that's what a lot of people look at. That runoff is a waste. Well, it's going back into the river, either through direct flows or um, being rediverted by the next producer. But it's this one, it's the invisible that you see that's is what really has fed the system over time. So if you go to a more uniform system or higher efficiency, even with furrow irrigation, look at the amount of changes that you can see with the percolation. Now also look at those drier areas that we have. So we're not getting as good a uniformity across the field, but that even has problems. So it's not an easy system to figure out on what's the best way to be efficient on those, except when you bring in technology. Now we bring in a center pivot here. If a center pivot is designed right and managed right, I should really not see deep percolation during the growing season unless I have a major precipitation. So I'm maintaining our soil moisture here at a consistent level over every square inch. Remember, we got dry areas up here that are not consuming as much water as what they should. We have areas here that overwatered. And what happens to plants that are overwatered? Are they happy or are they stressed? They're stressed, so they're cutting their ET, their crop consumptive use. But if I got every plant down here happy-go-lucky all season long, I'm consuming more water. And that's really what you got to look at is consumption, not applications. Going out here, looking at stored soil moisture through growing season, furrow irrigation is a big bounce. You're dry, you're exceptionally wet, you're dry, you're exceptionally wet. So look at the green is the happy plants, the brown is I'm too dry, the blue is I'm too wet. And plants like corn most plants don't like too wet, just as much as they don't like too dry. Plus, what else happens as you overwater a crop? Water quality issues down the road. Now, here's what happens with a good center pivot. If you're managing everything right, you stay within that zone of happy for where the plants respond the best. So every plant is transpiring at the maximum all growing season long. Whereas above here, the plants, I'm transpiring at where I want to be. Back, touchy. I'm transpiring where I want to be. Oops, I'm too dry. I'm not transpiring enough. I'm oversaturated. I'm not transpiring as much as what I should. Here I'm back to happy. I'm transpiring what I need to. So it's this up and down. And if it's not in the right zone, it's not transpiring water at optimum rates. Now, this is a quick look at what we call stream depletion factor. Anybody knows what a stream depletion factor is in here? Whether or not I take water away from the aquifer or I put water into the aquifer. This tells me, on average, when I peak out, how many days, months, years it takes to get back to the river from that point of either putting it in or taking water out of the aquifer system. So on this map here, a very small segment right up here, 270 days away, 120 days away, 30 days away, and here's the river telling me. So if I take water away from here, I'm somewhere between 30 and 120 days before I have impact to the water if I put a recharge pit in or I'm pumping. So I have to either replace my water at that point in time, place, amount with the water system. So that's how it is. So look at this recharge pit as a field. Well, I overwatered here. It's going to make it down to the river somewhere in here, feed somebody. And when you really look at how everything looks, it's a very amazing how efficient the river is, even with inefficiencies with furrow irrigation or field management. So this is looking impact of leaching, augmentation, on a field. Okay, I put a bunch of water in here into an augmentation pit, say 100 acre feet. Depending upon where you're at within that farm or away from the river and the high geology of that aquifer system, also how long it takes to get back to the river. Here you get a very quick peak, when you're 30 days away or when you're 120 days away, you get very high peaks very fast within the year, and even sometimes even just a little bit longer. But here, look at this. If you're 1,080 days, that's what, almost 3 years away from the river on that stream depletion factor. This is how long you have to impact. It takes you 20%, about 3 years out at this point in time. But look how long that tail is. You have an impact on the river at 17 years yet. And the rule of law is 100 years. If you have an impact on a groundwater pumping 100 years, that takes, even if it takes 100 years to impact that river, you have to manage accordingly. So if I'm a groundwater pumper, I got a stream depletion factor of 100 years basically, I still have to augmentate and manage that system. And that's one of the things you find is the further away wells really have struggled to develop those type of systems because of cost. Now, if I were putting water in, if I were taking water away, just almost reverse this graph downward. So return flows, the system was built on return flows. And that's how we developed it. Any changes we make on efficiency are going to interrupt stream flows. And if we have water rights people that say, I want water here, now, this time, this amount, even though I'm being more efficient, how do we go around and change that? You know, we've stabilized the flows with return flows. If we start making changes to the system, now we've started changing time. And it may not be immediate because of how, like I said, how long it takes to impact the river with return flows. So retiming the water to low flow times is what we've done over the years. And here's one of the interesting facts. There's 1.4 million acre feet of native water supplies in the South Platte. We import about 4 million or 400,000 acre feet from the Western Slope. And the Western Slope is trans-basin diversion. That's any entity has the right to consume that to extinction. So we don't even count that in the system, really. So we're looking at 1.4 million acre feet. How much water is diverted on an annual basis within the South Platte? Rough guess. 6 million, more or less. You already seen this. 4 million. 4 million acre feet of diversions on average. I guess I took that one out. So it's kind of like you talk about 1 + 1 does not always equal 2 in the system because you're basically working off of past years, inefficiencies, storage, making its way to the river system. On-farm efficiency has many benefits: greater yields, reduced leaching of nutrients. Water quality has always been an impact within either aquifer systems or even river systems, whether it's municipal or agriculture. Labor savings with furrow irrigation management compared to that furrow irrigation. There was a study done in Nebraska back in the late 80s, early 90s. One producer on a fully furrow irrigated system could manage about 800 acres, one person per person. Center pivot, put in a center pivot system, they're up to 1,500 to 2,000 acres. So it's a labor and time savings on that as well as greater yields potentially. And if you see greater yields, you know you're consuming more water because yield is very directly correlated to ET, evapotranspiration. It's a linear regression. So downfall, the reduced return flows, need for greater storage because we have to have storage to keep that water in Colorado because of that high flow time period. If we don't have storage to hold that, it's going where? Nebraska. If Nebraska can't use it, it goes to the Missouri River system, which goes into the Mississippi, which ends up in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. So it doesn't get used at all. Need for storage. So that's an expense. One of the things I've talked about and always talked about is when was the last major storage in Colorado built? It's been a long time. We're working off our parents and our grandparents or our great grandparents' efforts, and we really haven't increased that potential. You know, the other thing here is greater issues with salinity. One of the things we always say, solution to pollution is dilution. Well, now if we get higher efficiencies, one of the ways to take care of salinity is actually leaching those salts out, getting them out of the system. Well, now for higher efficiency, we're not leaching as much. So there's this catch-22. I'm being more efficient, but I'm not leaching those salts. Those salts are now accumulating within the system. And all you have to do is go west and look at that. California is a great example. They've increased their efficiencies. They deal with salts more and more. And we're seeing that in the lower part of the South Platte Basin. Talking about return flows and how well this can work. This is a time period when we're not having any new water coming into the system. Runoff is over with. This is when August 13th, so mid-August. We're starting out at 300 CFS. We do peak up to 450. We're diverting. So, and at one point here, at this point, we're doing what we call sweeping the river, drying the river up. But look how fast it builds back up with return flows. And by the time we get to the end of the state line, we're sitting at 250. We started with 300 at the top of this segment of the river. We're at 3. So we've lost 50 CFS. And how much water have we diverted? 1,500 CFS. That's the value of return flows. Another storage mechanism within the South Platte. And this is how much water we're actually starting to augmentate with, trying to feed the system. Oops, well, this is a touchy screen. Where am I at? Oh, I'm back over here. So we get over here. Oh, now I got to watch here. Depending upon the year, we can hit 300,000 acre feet of augmentation. More likely in the averages, somewhere around 100,000 in the lower part of the basin, on average. So, as efficiency changes, we'll have changes to the system. We'll need to make changes within the system to keep the system working the way it has been and the way it's been developed for water rights and economics. More water will remain in the river due to reduced, diversions early in the year, because I don't need a lot of water in May when we have the high flows. I'm not irrigating much in May on most crops because precipitation is also high, our greatest point at that time. So we need storage to save that water. And we have a lot of storage. Like I said, 2.4 million acre feet. So we manage it over the winter, get it down where we think the snowpack is at, according to the estimates, and that we can store it up. But now we're going to need even more storage. Less water in the river later in the year. That's going to start causing calls on the river. Like that, at one point in time, there was 600 consecutive days of calls on the river for storage and irrigation diversions. So we're going to need that additional storage, and additional storage is not cheap over the years. 2 recent impacts on the South Platte. Now, you guys may not think 2002 is recent. 21 years ago, Empire Lodge. Anybody studied Empire Lodge lawsuit? It was all about return flows, taking water out of priority with that system. So impact on out of priority water use, augmentation plans at that point in time, basically a paper shuffle. No real physical water ever moved. Some areas it was, some areas it wasn't. It created a shutdown of over 1,000 wells in a segment of the South Platte River, mainly from just west of Greeley to Fort Morgan. Now imagine losing in your balance sheet, losing the value of that irrigated ground. Many producers went broke and filed bankruptcy because they could not find water to augmentate with. True water. New augmentation plants. That's where we see this ramp up of augmentation over the last 15 years. And a lot of that has also been developed with environmental aspects, wildlife. Ducks Unlimited has put a bunch of money into the system as well as producers have developed this. Now we have ponds for wildlife, waterfowl coming through during the winter or late fall, early spring for them to sit. Development, to divert water when no call was on the river, that was allowed to seep back in the aquifer. So now that's what augmentation is. So over the winter time, most of the time, there's no calls on the river unless it's a storage right. And then those fill up. But people are now able to divert water away from the river, either direct diversion or through pumps. And a lot of times it's pumps because I can run a pump all the time. I don't have to worry about freeze ups. I don't have to worry about this. But it all goes back to time, place, and amount that we look at. Recent news, Perkins County Canal. When I first heard about this over 2 years ago, I had to do some digging because I never heard of this thing. It's been buried for decades. Nebraska does have the right to develop a diversion structure near Ovid, which is close to the state line, up to 500 CFS. I kind of laughed when the governor of Nebraska and politicians were all saying, you have to deliver 500 CFS. Nope, not right by here. That's not in there. Up to 500 CFS. This whole thing will play out. They think they'll have it built here in the next few years. This is going to play out for years. It's not an easy thing to look at. Look what it's taken to build NISP. It's been pretty close to 40 years now since the original concept and start process of NISP. They're on their second manager already. He retired out. It took that long. This is a threat to the augmentation in that lower basin because part of the compact says Colorado has the right to senior rights to 1921 and the development of 35,000 acre feet of additional water use, which is augmentation at that point in time. Well, they're developing 100,000. They've developed 100,000 acre feet of augmentation. So that's going to put a little bit of an issue there. I think what's going to play out, because 1986, Nebraska already did a settlement in courts on the Perkins County Canal, saying that endangered species trumps this issue right at that point. Nebraska's going to have to prove that any diversions through this structure will not impact endangered species down in the central part of Nebraska, which has been a big player in water in the whole Platte River system, North Platte, South Platte, and the Platte over the last 40 years, maybe 50. So there's going to be the big changes there. And with that, hey, 35 minutes. The hero with 35. Questions? And how much is in chat? We'll get back over here. Come on.
What did you mean about, I didn't totally follow in salinity. Because do you mean that generally when things are irrigated less efficiently and there's leaching permitted? I generally thought that meant that there was an issue with soil salinity.
It is soil salinity, but the water is coming in, whether it's coming from some source up above, higher up in the system, or through leaching through some type of a soil structure that has sodium within it or something that's a salt. Even selenium is a salinity issue. That's what they deal with on the west slope. This selenium is a big issue. But if it's adding salts to the river, and anytime you reuse water, you're adding salt, generally adding salts into the system. So the only way to make sure in the soil is an accumulator of salts, because if you put water on it and then you have transpiration going away or evaporation going away, salts don't evaporate or transpirate through the plant. They just stay there. So you have to leach that water out. That's those salts out. So with an inefficient system, that helps you with the leaching fraction, what we call the leaching fraction. So water is dissolving the salts, and generally sometimes you have to do some soil amendments, i.e. calcium carbonates, gypsum, to break those sodium molecules away from the soil, get them to be all leachable.
We're gonna have
And
next week we'll be
Tim will be talking more about
all of this.
So I'll send Tim a note. I threw you a softball, ready to get ready. So they're accumulating, and plants do not like high salinity soils. In fact, the lower basin no longer has dry bean production because that's the most intolerant plant of salinity in the agricultural realm. Did that kind of answer your question? Or do you?
Confused about why efficient irrigation results in increased soil salinity?
Well, okay, I'm putting less water on the soil, but more of that salts are staying in the soil because the only way to remove salt is to move it through the soil down to groundwater, back down to the water table. Now, also, here's the catch too with inefficient irrigation. One of the features of salinity management, and I have always preached this, is water table management. The water table's got to be so far down below the soil surface because inefficient systems, you're leaching a lot of water. Well, now here comes your water table pushing all those salts back up to the surface. And evaporation is now wicking those salts back up. Right. Now, also, you go to efficient systems, i.e. drip, for example, drip irrigation, subsurface drip. It's three-dimensional flow. It's pushing its salts back up to the surface. Whereas sprinkler and furrow irrigation are one-dimensional flow. It's pushing those salts down. But you have to have excess water to get it out of the root zone. And that's where inefficient systems, are nice. They do that. You get to high efficiency systems. People say, I don't have a time period when I can leach. But you start having to do targeted management with leaching with these high efficiency systems. And generally that's going to be in spring or fall.
Can I ask a follow-up question? If you have a pivot system installed, is there still like the infrastructure to do the leaching that you like? How do you do leaching?
Just keep applying water, pumping onto over the top and get it pushed down.
Yeah.
And that's why you do it in the spring when you don't have a lot of water use with crops. And you generally, springtime is our high water quality. On most salinity issues, you want high quality water to push them out. Not all. There are situations where good quality water will actually make the soil worse, collapse it, and that's a saline soda conditions. And you want dirty water to help you out. It's kind of mind boggling when you first get into it. It's like dirty water to help clean soils with dirty soil. Okay, but that's what you're going to have to do.
My same question. Is Colorado worried about saltwater intrusion and groundwater resources as well? If the water is getting pumped up and there's like new research coming out about salt impacting aquifers specifically in California?
Well, the reason California is because what's right next door? The Pacific Ocean.
This is more from the process of what you just described.
Yeah,
The salt
but
creating.
But normally with river systems like we have, yeah, you do start seeing salt accumulations in the aquifer, but we're doing generally enough flushing at some point is sending it downstream.
Okay.
And so Nebraska is going to start seeing that, those high salts, but hopefully they have enough precipitation that'll dilute those salt impacts. I lived and grew up in Nebraska until 2000. I moved here in 2000. And I worked in North Platte, Nebraska, and we always heard and saw the salinity aspects in the South Platte Basin, but it was just barely had crept into Nebraska. And we kept saying, is it the precipitation differences that we're seeing now? Because every 30 or 40 miles, it's an inch more precipitation as you go east. And
are you seeing a shift towards center pivot over furrow systems in like the Eastern Plains?
Yeah. In the South Platte Basin.
Yeah.
The Ogallala Aquifer virtually.
Can you repeat that?
Oh, he asked about are we seeing the conversion to pivots in this? Well, he said Eastern Colorado, but primarily the South Platte, yes. And that's the labor factor. We just don't have the labor anymore like we used to. And even along the Front Range where we had a lot of high production, high value vegetable production like sweet corn, onions, and a lot of things, those are going downhill because we don't have the labor to help with the harvest. One producer says, if I want to do sweet corn, I got to find rooms for 80 people, pay for those rooms and get their visas and everything all set up because generally they're coming from Mexico on, I can't remember what type of visa it is, green card visa, but it's a work permit where they do seasonal harvest. And he says it has become extremely difficult. He had one of his employees go to Mexico, help them get through the system. And unfortunately, the system is kind of corrupt down in some certain areas. They go to the Mexican consulate. Well, we're missing this, we'll put their hand out. Oh, here, now you go here to go get this. And then the next place does the same thing. So that's been a big problem. And they've gone away from some of these production systems.
Is the shift dictated anything by like junior water right users or their senior users as well moving towards that? And then if it is senior water users, when the river goes on call, what are they doing essentially with the extra water? Because they have to dry up the river and use their full water right amount.
It depends upon a lot of things because generally senior water rights when they are as senior water rights or junior water rights go to these high efficiency systems, how do things change? There are times where senior water rights users were not fully irrigating all their potential acres. So they go to a high efficiency system. Now they're irrigating all their acres. They're consuming more water, but it's within their rights that they used to have years ago. Junior water rights are doing it because if I get half the flow, I'm more efficient with that water. Now you have the augmentators, the guys that are developing groundwater, utilizing that to irrigate they're generally not close to the river, they're off the river, so they're being very efficient with their water, limited water amounts that they have. But then they're augmentating those consumptive uses.
What are some of the trends that you're seeing with improved irrigation efficiency and how much of ag water is being transferred to municipalities?
If the water is being transferred to municipalities, it's not through improved irrigation efficiency. You cannot transform unconsumed water. It has to be consumed because of the return flows. My water downstream is your inefficiency upriver. So if I transfer those inefficiencies to a municipality, that water is not coming downstream. So in the technical situation and how the state looks at it, transfer of water is you have to either dry up those acres and they're sold, generally sold water rights to municipalities because municipalities don't like to lease very much because they like consistency and predictability into the future. They'll lease those water rights back to agriculture. But what the process goes is they look over the last 10 years, what's your production practices been, what crops have you grown, and all that. They look at the precipitation patterns so they can come up with a net irrigation amount of irrigation that was consumed by those plants above and beyond natural precipitation. So I might be applying 2 feet of water to a crop, but I can't sell 2 feet of water. I can only sell maybe 1 acre foot, 18 an acre foot and a half, because based on what my consumption is. At one point in time, we had drip salesmen coming in and say, "Oh, you're 50% more efficient. You're twice as efficient. You can sell that water now." And I got on there, like, "No, you can't." Boy, that was a long, heated discussion. That guy went down the road, find out all the different potential opinions. I said, "Go talk to the state engineer. They're the ones that run it." And I try to get through court system. It'll be laughed out of the court in a heartbeat if a lawyer ever takes it. A water lawyer in the state of Colorado ever takes those things.
Does that make sense? Yeah, the water right is actually based on the consumptive use.
Yeah, it's based on the consumptive, not the diverted.
So it's very interesting.
So if you, like I showed, if you divert 5 CFS, you can't sell 5 CFS. But I showed that 3 CFS return flip back to the river. Well, then really in reality, your sellable water is 2 CFS of that water right. We've got a couple more minutes left.
Just curious, what do you think the future is for furrow irrigation? Do you see it being used long term or no?
Oh, there'll be some irrigation along, but how do you compete with municipalities and the growth we're seeing up here? I'll just give you one quick example. CBT, I mean, everybody knows what CBT water is after. I think last week, was it with Brad or was it 2 weeks ago?
For 3 weeks.
Is it that long ago? Okay, Brad Wynn, that CBT water is trans-basin diversion. That used to be 80-20 agriculture municipality. It's now what, 90-10 municipal agriculture. A water right is 0.8 of an acre foot, and a water right on CBT is $75,000 a share. So you're talking close to $100,000 an acre foot. If I'm using 2 acre feet of water on a piece of ground, that's $200,000. Name me a crop in Colorado that will net you $200,000 over time. Not only you got the annual cost based on that, but just put it on simple mathematics, 5% interest rate, which is easy, $10,000 a year just in interest on owning that water right. That's an expensive crop, or I should say valuable crop. And go back to the agriculture, because we had a long discussion at the last Larimer County meeting, and everybody said, well, animal agriculture wastes all this water. Well, that's where I came back and said, you as the consumer consume 100% of the water. It's your choice. What do we consume? But here was the one thing that one of them got off on, and he didn't really realize it because he was too hot. Old meeting. I said, okay, most of Colorado is not agriculture, farming, row crop agriculture. It's grazing. If we get rid of animal, 4-legged, ruminant grazing, what happens to those pasture lands? Anybody guess? The what?
Great.
That degrades some. Yeah, but they're now an economic wasteland. They're not producing $1 of net return, gross returns to the community. So you're going to see communities like Lyman and all those other ones that are out on the East Slope that depend on this real estate taxes for schools, roads, community, everything, hospitals. That's all going to dry up, go away.
Well, are people mostly upset about like the combined animal feeding operations, not about the like grazing?
They talk about the amount of water that's in those, but in reality, agriculture has been growing to bigger and bigger operations because of economics. And confined feeding animal operations, if they're managed right, are okay. I mean, I still love to go back 40, 50 years ago where everybody had 10 milk cows, 20 pigs, 50 cows, all that, but that's not going to happen again. CAFOs are here to stay. And that goes back to efficiencies. I think beef prices or any kind of meat prices are substantially lower today because of that concentration in livestock production and efficiencies as compared to what if we went back to the old system. And in reality, you go back to the old system. I grew up with the feedlots were not well regulated. The runoff was not regulated. A lot of people had feedlots where the creek ran through the feedlot. And then where did that water go? And was it contaminated with? Back in the old days, they didn't realize what the water quality impacts were and all that back in those days. So the good old days is heartstring pulls heartstrings, but the reality of it is these environmentally, these CAFOs are better long term. Hate to say it. I mean, I'd love to be back in the old days, but it's just a factor of reality.
I have one more question online from Jennifer. Can farmers be more efficient with different crops? Why don't they just change crops?
We can. There are crops that use lower water. We're working on some of those. So I'll give a plug here. Eat black-eyed peas. We can grow them in here, Colorado, very efficiently. They use about 15% less water than traditional black, like a pinto bean. We actually can grow them dry land in Colorado, whereas you can't grow pinto beans dry land.
Okay.
And they taste good. I think they're actually a better tasting bean than pintos. And I love pinto beans. Refried beans, hey. So we can do those. We can do those. But here's the issue. We got to have a market. If there's no market, we can't sell a product. Nobody's going to grow something that they cannot produce. And some of these niche markets, you grow a pickup load of them, you have a market. You grow a pickup load in a 5-gallon bucket and you crash the market where it's worthless. And I've seen that done. Remember, hey, some of you still might be a little young, but here's another one that was grown as water efficient hemp. Hemp drove out and bankrupted numerous farmers because of what was promoted as. One of the farm machinery implement dealers, 35 miles west of where I live, had nothing in his lot for about 4 months because he was out hunting where that producer who was at the farm on hemp, where he hid all his equipment until he could get it back from them. Because the manufacturer says, until you find all that leased equipment, you're not getting another thing. So he almost drove out another business with that. Not only did he drive himself out, he almost drove another business out. So hemp has got a big black eye in the agricultural. And in reality, from the start, I was going like, that they're pushing it too hard. And do we have a market for that much? I was really questioning it. And now do you see many hemp fields? I haven't seen one in 2 years. Whereas I used to be seeing them here and there everywhere at one point. But that goes back to that market. So we can definitely grow crops, but one of the big ones is Also, the low water use crops are like vegetable crops and that too as well. We need the labor. Because they're not most of them are not machine harvested, they're manual harvested. And how many of us want to go back and start picking green beans and melons out of the field, like they used to? Day in, day out, 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours a day.
Well. Hopefully I don't have enough people who are gonna go do that with.
Yeah, hopefully. But do they want to do that? That's the question. I mean, you're here for an education. You don't want to do grunt work. As politely, that's military talk, some military talk. But you want to be up there above that. You don't want to, because I'll tell you what, my back does not, growing up on a farm, hauling hay bales and all that. I'm glad I got out when I did. I still miss it, but my back and my knees would not have been kept up over the years. And with that, I think 4 minutes left before 5. Are we done? Jennifer, are you done asking questions?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. That was well done.
See any more questions in the chat?
No.
Well, thank you very much for everybody. And we can stop sharing and stop it.